Well, hello there, and welcome to another installment of Warbird Wednesday. I'm Fred Bell, the Vice Chairman of Palm Springs Air Museum. We're going to be talking about this heavyweight behind me, the P-47 Thunderbolt. And you can tell I'm very festive today. We're filming on Cinco de Mayo for the segment. I want to give a shout out to the 201st Fighter Squadron from Mexico that fought in World War II. They flew this airplane behind me, this type of airplane, the P-47. I'm going to toss my very festive hat off to my sultry assistant, Greg Kenny, who has picked another incredible name for himself in his descriptor, and we'll get to the stage 2 that he's picked for me in a few minutes. Now, this airplane was designed by Alexander Kartveli. He was in a competition with Alexander Seversky, and they were trying to come up with a new high-altitude heavyweight fighter for the Army Air Force at that time. Now, an interesting, here's the first Fred fun fact of the day. They were both Georgian. And I'm not talking about Georgia in the United States. I'm talking about USSR Georgia. They were both immigrants who were fleeing Stalin. They got involved in the aircraft business, and the rest is history. Both those names you probably know. This airplane came into service in 1942. Top speed was originally was around 433 miles an hour, but some of the very late versions got up to about 505. And this was a very fast airplane. It was designed from the outset to be a high altitude interceptor. It was never designed for anything else. It did evolve into a fighter bomber. We're going to talk about that later in the war. It could carry a lot of payload. It was also really well known for the ability of punishment that it could take. Other than the Avenger, this was the heaviest fighter, and the Avenger was a torpedo bomber, but this was the heaviest fighter ever built by the Army Air Force during the war. It's got that R-2800 double Wasp in there. That's also the engine that was built around the Corsair and the F-6F, the Hellcat. So Greg, why don't we take a walk around? Now you can see over my right shoulder the Squirt 8 artwork. Now Squirt 8 was original artwork, and that is from Richard Parker's airplane. And the reason there's 8 of them is Richard had a very interesting habit of getting shot up, especially on ground missions, and he would lose an airplane. And one of the things he always said was, it was great. I'd take out a perfectly good airplane, destroy it, and they'd give me a new one. So he burned through a lot of airplanes in ground attack missions. Interesting thing, another interesting fact about the museum, John Parker continues to be on our board. He's a family member of Richard, so we're carrying on the legacy, and he is also very big in aviation. Now, this airplane, when it started out, was a little bit different configuration. Greg, why don't we walk just to my left a little bit, and we'll get a little bit better view of the aircraft. This aircraft is a later model P-47. The original design had a higher fuselage and was very similar. You've seen the P-40 where the pilot was built down into the aircraft. These aircraft had a much, much higher fuselage at that time. As with most late war fighters, they realized that visibility was king. And so what they did is they went to a bubble canopy. I'm going to tell you a couple interesting things about the change in the airframe on the bubble canopy in a minute. But as you can see in the wing, and we don't have, I'm going to walk around right here, a lot of times with these fighters after the war when they entered into the civilian service, this is a delete panel. That's where the machine guns went. This was a 50 caliber machine gun. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but it carried the heaviest armament of interceptors during the war, and that was 4 50 caliber machine guns in each wing. It's a little bit different than a lot of other fighters where you've seen 6. This thing, again, was designed to be an interceptor from the start, and it was designed to hit hard. Now, the aircraft was better known as a high-altitude fighter, and that is where most of its kills came from, its aerial victories. It is a complete departure from the P-51. This airplane is, again, more of a heavyweight boxer. The P-51 was more nimble, more agile design, liquid-cooled airplane. This had that big air-cooled engine on it, which is also another reason why it was so good for ground attack. Now I'm going to walk out front here, and I'm going to give you another couple of Fred fun facts. As we did last week's segment, we are packed with Fred fun facts today. This is a triple ace Ken Dahlberg, and his statue is here at the museum. He's a triple ace in Europe. Now, there's an interesting Fred fun fact about him, and you can look this up on Wikipedia. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but he was shot down, and one time when he was shot down, he was rescued by an army patrol. The head of the army patrol and good old Ken here were both involved in Watergate. So go out and look that up and figure out how they were. But isn't that ironic that the guy who rescued him and Ken later in life would both be involved in Watergate? Now, there are a lot of aces that came out of the European theater. They were facing off against primarily German fighters and a very stubborn German air defense. When I go around here, Greg, I'm going to work to my left, and we're going to talk about some other interesting artifacts that we have here. Much like what we did with the Japanese soldier, we actually have Axis artifacts here. And the thing that's interesting about a lot of these things is that they actually tie back to individuals. Now, this is an ME-109E model, and it is in the markings of Joachim Muchenberg. It's in his colors. He had 135 aerial victories in Europe, and he had that, think about this, he was killed in an aerial collision, which I'll tell you in a minute, in 1943. So by 43, he already had 135 aerial victories. That was kind of the Axis philosophy because they could not train enough pilots, and unfortunately what ended up happening was they had a philosophy with their experienced pilots that you pretty much fly till you die. There wasn't a rotate out. You flew until you were either seriously injured or you were killed or you survived the war. It's one reason why when you look up a lot of these units, they just say destroyed after them because at a certain point in the war, they were just essentially wiped out. Now, when you're looking at some of these artifacts, it's important, and when you see airplanes at air shows, it's one thing, I love them running up, I love them doing what they do and they fly. But one of the things that's really important is just like with Richard Parker or Muchenberg, tell the story about the pilot and make sure that you get it right. In this particular artifact, the S, the Gothic S, is actually a symbol that the unit derived when they were in the occupation of the Rhineland in the mid-1930s, and the S is actually after the name of a local patriot that the unit adopted, and that became their insignia throughout the war. Now, I think, and you can go out and look at this, if my memory serves, there's actually an ME-109 in the Imperial War Museum that was shot down that actually has this. It's depicted, a real airplane that's actually depicted with this. Now, the Germans on the tail had their aerial victories, and the nose. The interesting thing about the nose is that you can see this is yellow nose. Now, a lot of yellow nose aircraft with Luftwaffe aircraft would either be section leaders or aces. But the other thing about Luftwaffe aircraft with yellow noses is that the yellow nose concept actually goes all the way back to 1940, where a lot of German aircraft would paint the underside of the aircraft yellow as an identification marker. So it was not originally just to identify either a rank or a status within a squadron or a wing. So this is Joaquins Airplane. Now, the sad part about Joaquin was he was killed in an aerial collision. His wingman claims, the airplane that was shot down, wingman claims that the aircraft that was hit by Joaquin actually rammed him. Now, that is not uncommon throughout the war with pilots that were mortally injured or their aircraft were mortally injured. I'm not talking about kamikazes. I'm talking about there are incidents throughout the war where pilots would make a decision to actually ram their target. In this case, Joaquin died of his injuries. As a result of that, he was killed in 1943. Now, one of the other interesting, very interesting artifacts is this, and Greg, I'm not sure if you can get this. This is the top of the control stick of an ME-109. Now, one of the things, a lot of times in these airplanes now when they fly, a lot of these triggers and things are deleted in the gun sights, but this actually still has the safety and the cannon trigger for that Mark 108 cannon, and then it has a bomb release, and inside there's a machine gun trigger, and down here is the electric arming switch for the cannon. Now, why did you arm the cannon? Well, the Germans, much more differently than most, they kept going to higher caliber weapons, and the reason for that was quite simple. Remember, we talked about before, they did a study and they were only hitting enemy aircraft about 2% of the time. Well, cannon shells are bigger. You don't want to waste them. You got a lot more machine gun bullets. So if you got in on the target and you wanted to arm your cannon, you'd arm your cannon, and this was up there to make sure that you didn't inadvertently fire it. You had to pick that up, and then you could go to a cannon. Think about that. That's the whole time that you're managing the airplane in the air, trying to figure out where it is. You're trying to hit somebody, and you got buttons all over the cockpit that you got to figure out what you're going to shoot at somebody with. Now, one of the things I want to do, Greg, is I'm going to go with my Stage 2. And my Stage 2 today is Sioux City Sarsaparilla. Sioux City is not a sponsor of this segment, by the way. This is the granddaddy of all root beers. It's made with cane sugar, that's what it says. So we're going to open the Stage 2. Get that out here. You'll pop the cap on camera. I'm going to see what this tastes like. Greg, you made two good choices. I'm going to keep this with me. This is the only time I get sugar anymore, so I'm going to keep this with me while I'm working through this. So we have Parker's jacket on the table, and we have, if you have a hankering and you want to get a shirt, remember online we have all these cool shirts. We have the various things, including when you come to the museum, Parker's dog tags, gloves, goggles, and look at that. That's the flight helmet. Think about that when you're flying around. You guys flying with real rigid helmets today. Back in the day, you didn't do that. Now, the P-47 is well known as a air supremacy aircraft in Europe. It also flew in the Pacific, both in the Western Pacific and later in the war in B-29 escort missions into Japan. There are so many dashes and marks of this airplane that I'm not going to go into it because they did a ton of modifications on this airplane, including increasing its range with a wet wing. It actually had areas in it where wet wing where you could actually store fuel in it. They changed the canopy. They did a number of modifications on the airplane. The D model, there were about 15,000 of them made. The D model was the most predominant. I'm going to talk about a couple of little interesting design features. But first, what I want to do with my Stage 2 is, if you don't get a chance, go out, and for the month of May, we are flying every Friday in the Coachella Valley to salute first responders. And so what I want to do is I'm going to have an excuse to take another swig of this very sugary drink, made with cane sugar, I might add. Salute our first responders. Our first responders are essential workers, all the people who have been working while a lot of us have stayed home and tried to stay safe. This is to you. God bless you. Thank you for all that you do. And if you get a chance, say thank you to those folks while you're out. It's very stressful for a lot of people right now, and we want to wish them well. Now, the P-47 flew in the Pacific. Now, there was a big difference between how you operated the P-47 in Europe versus the Pacific. In Europe, this airplane was flying at high altitude. It was flying primarily as escort with the B-17s, B-24s, bombing missions into Europe. Later in the war, as the Allies achieved air supremacy, In Europe, the aircraft dropped down and it became more of a fighter bomber. And as we said, Richard burned up a few of these airplanes, attacking ground targets and boxcars and things of that nature. But the airplane was really designed to be a fighter. It operated very well in the thin air because it had a supercharger. We've talked about superchargers before. I'm not going to get too deep into it. But when you get up to high altitude, what they do is they essentially compress the air, and they trick the engine into thinking that it's operating at sea level or down low. They push more air into the carburetor, into the fuel system, and so that increases the power. It keeps the power the same no matter where they're operating. In the Pacific, the aircraft, all of the airplanes were operating, with the exception of B-29s that were going in to attack targets in Japan later in the war, out of Iwo Jima and Saipan. The aircraft were operating at much lower altitudes. This airplane was not really well suited for that. P-47 pilots in the Pacific had to be extremely careful at low altitude, because if they got caught low with this airplane, the Japanese airplanes operated very well and were much more maneuverable. In fact, the highest rated ace that had the most aerial victories in the Pacific, who had 22 aerial victories, was actually shot down because of he went down to check on an airplane. He had a victory, shot it down. He got down low and he got caught by a German or a Japanese fighter low, and he was killed. And that was a big problem with this airplane. If you got down too low, it just did not operate well at low altitude. So why don't we walk around? You know, the Republic, this aircraft, again, we're talking about different design philosophy. Republic built this thing pretty much like a tank. It's built like a tank, where it could take a ton of punishment. It had armor, it was big, and there are accounts of Germans catching damaged Thunderbolts and pouring lead into them, and they continue to fly. They continue to come home. Or ground attack missions where the airplane would be badly damaged and would make it back to its base. As the war went on, as I said, this airplane became more of a ground attack aircraft, and one of the things that made it well suited for that was that radial engine. Remember, it was not liquid cooled. The P-51 had that radiator down low. The P-51 Mustang, one bullet in the radiator and you were done. This airplane, you didn't have to worry about that. It could take tons of punishment. Now, one of the things it was shooting at was something here to my left. Greg, we're going to talk about another very interesting artifact. And this thing actually runs. Greg drives this down to the store to get lunch every once in a while and does extreme motocross in it. If you want to go out and do something really interesting, try doing motocross with a tracked vehicle. It's kind of interesting, catching air with that thing. This is a Kettengrad. Now, a Kettengrad could tow artillery. It could transport troops. You can see this one actually has the K-98 rifles attached to it. It's more of a troop carrier. It was used heavily in Russia, and in the mud in the Russian, as they went across vast regions of Russia. It could tow artillery. Later in the war, you'll see newsreel footage of these things actually towing German jet bombers and Me-262s late in the war, because the Germans would actually tow them out and then start them. Start the jets. There was about 8,000 of these made. They actually were made in a very small run post-war, but they didn't really catch on. So they kind of petered out in the late 40s. This is one of the very few examples that runs. So if you get to the museum, see if you can catch Greg, my sultry assistant, and see if he'll drive the Kettengrad around for you. So let's walk around the P-47, get back to business here. All metal airplane. This airplane also has a special place in my heart. As I said, one of my uncles was in B-17s. It was shot down. My other uncle was in P-47s in the Pacific, in the Western Pacific, and then as they flew escort missions into Japan in P-47Ns. So this airplane holds a little bit of a special place in my heart. You can see, and again, the scale of this. You can see the size of this airplane. Again, in relation to the Avenger, which is a torpedo bomber, it's big. It's really big. But it performed its role really well. One of the challenges that they had with P-47s was, at that time, they really did not understand the speed of sound and compression. In other words, as an airplane goes faster and faster in the air, and by the way, I am completely just doing a very top-level view of speed of sound stuff here because we don't have time. But as the airplane goes faster and faster, the air builds up until you break through the sound barrier on this, and they didn't really understand that. Now, piston engine airplanes were not really well suited for that, and one of the things was this aircraft was incredibly good in a dive. It was very fast in a dive. These aircraft, there are a number of accounts of these airplanes breaking the sound barrier and the pilots losing control, because remember, most of these surfaces on most World War II airplanes were not hydraulically assisted. They were cables that were going back and forth to that control stick. As that air goes over these control surfaces faster and faster, you lose the ability to be able to pitch any of those control surfaces to deflect air one way or another. And they didn't really understand what was going on. I mean, they had some idea, but the airplane would go out of control, and most of the time the airplane was lost. But these aircraft would periodically, depending on the environment they're operated in, they would break the sound barrier or get very close to breaking the sound barrier. And again, I'm being very broad brush with that because we don't have a lot of time. You can look that up, or when we get into jets, which we are going to move on to jets, we will have a much bigger conversation about that. So you can see the side view of this aircraft. Now, as I said, pilot was built into this airplane with that kind of lattice canopy in early versions of this airplane. As we went to the more air superiority version of the aircraft, we put the pilot up, we put the bubble canopy, we reduced the fuselage. And one of the things that comes with that, when you reduce the fuselage and you're not in the airstream as much with the air, remember air's moving around the airplane, you lose the ability to control the airplane sometimes in either a pitch or a yaw. And a yaw instability, when they slimmed this airplane down, they created a yaw instability in the airplane. The airplane, for lack of a better term, and again, it's really top level on this, the airplane would fishtail, okay? And remember, you have that big paddle up front with all that power, that prop. If you don't have enough air back here with resistance, the airplane would get very squirrely. What they did with this, and you can see that on a lot of airplanes that they have reduced the area here, is they put this fin on. This is a modification with late D model Mark airplanes to add more deflection back here and more deflection ahead of the rudder to keep the airplane from fishtailing. Another airplane that did that a lot, and we have it in our inventory and we'll talk about it at some point, is the Mark 14 Spitfire. The Mark 14 Spitfire was a very late version of Spitfire. It was really designed to go after the buzz bombs, the very early version of a German cruise missile they were raining down on Britain at that time. And so they slendered down that fuselage because they had the same thing. The pilot in the early versions was buried in the airplane. They slimmed it down, and the airplane did have some yaw instability. So this fin, this is a dead giveaway of that. You can see it slimmed down, and then they extended this fuselage. Now these aircraft, after the war, went on to serve in some South American countries. For a while there, they were quite rare flying. Now there are a number of P-47s flying at air shows and things of that nature, but they are probably one of the coolest airplanes in my book, again, because I have a family member, one of the coolest airplanes to come out of World War II. Certainly an illustration and a difference in design. So my name is Fred Bell. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum. We've done a walk around of the P-47. Remember, smash that subscribe button, hit the like button on Facebook. We can use your donations. Go out to that web store and get yourself one of those great shirts. I am going to, as I usually do, sign off with another swig of my Stage 2. Greg, your choices have been absolutely fantastic. Keep it up. I'm enjoying this. Thank you very much from the Palm Springs Air Museum, and have a great day.